The cardinals are now locked up in the Sistine Chapel to select the Pope. So that brings us to a very important question, or two questions. And that is the Pope the successor of Peter? And did Jesus make Peter the Pope? I'm going to answer that, but let me just tell you, the answer is no. Now, all my Catholic friends, listen, don't turn it off. You know I'm not a Catholic hater. So I want you to listen to why I don't believe that Jesus made Peter Pope or that the Bishop of Rome is his successor. And let's take a look at the passage. And in fact, it's really the only passage in the scriptures that the Catholic Church can use to try to say that Peter was made the head of the church. And it's here in Matthew 16, verse 16. Listen to this. Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." All right, that's the passage. So the argument of the Catholic Church is this, that Jesus made Peter to be the rock of the church, and that he was the head, and that God intended that there should be always a head of the church. Of course, the question is, how do you get a man who's living in Israel all of a sudden becoming the Bishop of Rome and making the bishops of Rome the successor? So that's another leap of illogic, okay? So listen to me carefully. Let's look at this passage carefully, and let's look at the language that Jesus is actually using. He says, "Blessed are you." Now, who's he talking to? He's talking to Peter. "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you." Can you all say you? All right? "By flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you," who's he talking to? Peter. "That you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Wait a minute. He shifted the pronouns from you to this. If he's talking to Peter that he's the rock by which the church is built on, explain why he doesn't say, "Upon you I will build my church," or "Upon you, the rock, I will build my church." He doesn't say, "You, Peter, I will build my church." He says, "And upon this rock." He is not speaking to Peter when he mentions rock. He's speaking of something that Peter just said. Listen to me. Many of our early church fathers agreed with this idea that Jesus was not making Peter the rock, but was making his confession of faith to be the rock. Many of our church fathers said that. And this is what Jesus is pointing to. By using the pronoun this, he's pointing away from Peter and saying something else, not to Peter. Do you get this? Now, you say to me, "Well, wait a minute. Maybe he just is trying to tell the apostles, this is the rock I'm building the church." Oh, so now you're saying he's talking to all the apostles at this point. Well, but the next verse says, "And I will give you the keys." He didn't say, you all, right? He said you. So you all say he has the keys, but yet all of a sudden, this is no longer speaking to Peter, but speaking of something that Peter said. Now, fortunately, we have the Greek that tells us this. All right? John Chrysostom, who was one of our early church fathers, the doctor of the church, he signifies and says that Jesus was not speaking to Peter, and he's a church father who knew Greek. And the reason why is because of the Greek words. Verse 18, "I tell you that you are Peter." Peter is Petros. Oh, Petros. "And upon this rock is Petra with an A." That's a feminine word. You know, a lot of languages, English doesn't have this, but a lot of languages, Greek, Latin, Spanish, French, they have masculine and feminine words to describe something. Now, the English language cut that all out so that we only have one definite article, the house, the lake, the man, the woman. We don't have a different article to speak of a man or a woman, male or female, because we don't use objects as male and female unless it's speaking of human beings, all right? Or speaking of animals that are male or female. But even then, we don't change the definite article. So in French, I took French, and I remember learning about this, and boy, that threw me off. I thought, how am I ever going to learn French if I have to know what the definite article or what to use? You understand? If I'm speaking of a feminine, I have to say la. If I'm speaking of male, le. Well, how do I know if a house or a lake is male or feminine or female? I couldn't figure it out. Well, fortunately, in Greek, the word rock is Petra. With an A, it's feminine. Why would Jesus be using a Greek word that is feminine to speak of Peter? Do you see this? Doesn't make sense. So right away, I recognize Peter was not given or was made the rock. And he was not the only one to receive these keys of the kingdom. Because in chapter 18, Jesus is now speaking to all the apostles. And in verse 18, truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loose in heaven. That passage is speaking to all the 12 apostles. Okay? So the same thing that the keys did to bind and loose, he gave it to all the apostles. Therefore, Peter was not made the sole head of the church. Was he a leader in the church? Absolutely. No one argues with that point. But he was not the sole head and in charge of everybody, you see, or intended to be the head of all the Christians. Even when Paul writes in Galatians, he said Peter agreed that he's going to go to the Jews and I'm going to go to the Gentiles. That doesn't sound like a universal bishop to me, does it? See, so the passage doesn't say anything about Peter being the head of the church. Now, somebody might say, but Bishop, in Matthew 18, the words keys is not used, only binding and loosing. What does it matter? What did the keys do? They bind and loose, and that's the same phrase he gave. If I said, for example, to a man, I'm going to give you the keys so that you can lock and unlock the church. And then I turn to someone and says, you know what, I'm going to give you the part of lock and unlock too, okay? Now, how does he know he's going to lock and unlock? He has to have keys too. You understand? I don't have to say keys if I'm saying what the keys do. And that's what Jesus did. He gave it to all 12 apostles, not just to one. And so when he says upon this rock, he's referring to the rock of revelation. And then once you discover that Peter's not a pope, then you don't have to look at a successor. But let me just ask you this question. Why would a man, Peter, who lives in Jerusalem, who travels around the world, all of a sudden be the Bishop of Rome? Because he wasn't. Even Paul writes his letter to Rome, and in chapter 16, he gives greetings to all the leaders in Rome, and Peter's never mentioned. So we know Peter did not live in Rome. So why would bishops of Rome be the successor of Peter? Well, he died there. So what? Dying there doesn't make you the head or a successor of the man who dies in your city. What does it matter? Dying it's not the same thing. Don't you get it? So I'm not going to get into all how the Catholic Church Pope became so powerful. You could study it. But what I want you to see is he is not intended to be the head of the church. So the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, he's the head of the Roman Catholic Church, and that's it. He's not my head. He's not the head of the other 1.3 million Christians. All right, he's the head of 1.3 million Roman Catholics, but he's not the head of everybody, nor did God intend him to be the head. And if he intended him to be the head, here's my question. Why hasn't the Pope ever in the history of Christianity ever been the head of the universal church? If that's what Christ established, then Christ must have failed because he did not establish him as the head. Because never in the history of Christianity has the Pope of Rome ever been the head of all Christians. It's never happened one time in all of Christian history. And friend, that's proof also in an experiential way that God never intended one man to be the head of the church.